ask you to stop. About some of the experiences over the last 4 or 5 years together, and I had the 5-hour marathon at Willow River in the auditorium, and I can't remember which board meeting, Sue, when we looked over and you had your sunglasses on in the middle of the meeting and nobody was expecting it. I don't remember. Just a lot of great memories of the partnership and the relationships built in Hudson. So excited to be back and looking forward to build many more memories together. So a little about Bray, most of you know, but we're celebrating our 57th year designing almost exclusively K-12 facilities. So this is the first building we did in 1962, back when your father could hire a son to design a building for you. So Larry Bray Sr.'s father was the superintendent of schools in Valdez and hired him to design a school for him. Not sure you can get away with that anymore, but we just went back this last year, so a longtime client remodeled, did an HVAC upgrade on the historic building in the back. So a great longtime client, really foundational to what we do as K-12. Excited to continue growing. We're now practicing with offices in Wisconsin, but also in Iowa and Illinois. So active projects in 3 states, and excited to continue growing the team, remaining committed to Wisconsin as our base of operations. We're 70 team members, specialists across the board, including all the team members that you've met previously, interior design staff, BIM specialists, but the foundation of our organization is still architecture and planning. So 24 architects on staff, continue to look to hire and are trying to grow that team as we service clients throughout the Midwest. Quick snapshot, so over the past 5 years we've had the great fortune of working with over 65 school districts, many of them similar to you in terms of a larger school district with multiple elementary schools. Have done a great deal of community engagement work, over 100 community engagement sessions, whether we're supporting a client, whether we're leading the effort, whether we're facilitating, depends on the client, depends on the strategy, but a great deal of experience with that facilitation aspect of projects. So Steve, Mike, and I will be 3 key members of your team leading the planning and design efforts. Additional team members, Kara and Nathan, they lead a lot of our K-12 study efforts, so they're going to be doing existing building verification work. They together have led big projects in Neenah, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, large districts, many elementary schools, so they're very familiar with exactly the type of process and project that we're going to be partnering with you on. Consultants, 2 known team members to you, point of beginning in Mermin, so great longtime partners of Bray, they've remained part of the team. Then a new partner to the team, design engineers. They would be leading the HVAC analysis and design effort if we were to move ahead. So a great organization. They're Iowa-based, have an office in Madison, but do a lot of K-12 schoolwork as well. And I think you'll enjoy having them as a part of our team. The majority of our conversation is going to be about process, timeline, engagement strategy. So we find that projects are only successful, studies are only successful, however you look at this. If we do all of these things right, we could do great stakeholder engagement, but have no ability to articulate the financial impact. That's not going to do any good. Inversely, we can have the greatest option or solution possible, but if it's way too expensive for the community, it's irrelevant. It was a great idea that the community couldn't afford or wasn't willing to support. So when we do all of these things right, and we have to look at every solution through all these lenses, we're going to find community support. So it's our job to work with you in making sure that we evaluate every aspect of a potential project or potential solution, in this case, to make sure that we can find success at the end. So 7 steps that we found successful. These are created without any input from you. So this is our first shot. We need a lot of engagement with you to understand exactly how you want to deliver the project. And we're going to talk a little bit about some areas we know there might be some overlap with work you've already done. But the first phase is project initiation. We need to nail down exactly what schedule we want to work towards. How are we going to make decisions? What structure are we going to use? This is an example. It's a hypothetical where we may want to talk about creating 4 subcommittees that are going to be working in support of a core planning team. So you can see 2 at the top: infrastructure, capital maintenance, safety, security. Safety, security, you're in a good place. Don't know exactly how you did through the grant structure, but any study process we go through, even if we're in a really good place, we still have to have the ability to articulate to the community that safety and security is part of our plan. If we have it done, great. If there's still some more things we want to do, we have to make sure we can articulate them. We're going to get asked. We need to have a good, solid answer for the community through the lens of safety and security. Infrastructure capital maintenance is a big piece of this. Obviously, the Krauss-Anderson study has laid the groundwork for a lot of the effort in terms of evaluating facilities, but there's likely going to be more that needs to be done as we move through the process. So who are we working with day to day or week to week when we're really focusing in on infrastructure capital maintenance. Steve's going to talk in a bit about our educational visioning process that we take clients through. So how do we make sure that space supports teaching and learning, not just today but into the future? It's not just quantity of classrooms. We all know teaching and learning is very different than it was when we went to school, 30 desks in a row at a chalkboard. We need to go through a process to make sure that we understand exactly your goals for a K-8 delivery. So two potential subcommittees here. The middle school, relatively straightforward, just really building within your current middle school staff. Different grade levels represented, special ed represented, all your exploratories, phy-eds, bands, choirs, all the different groups that we need to have engaged. One or two reps from each of those groups to become our visioning team that we're going to work with. Curricular leadership teams in the district always involved. Elementary school is a little more complicated. We've got schools spread all over the district. This is one strategy that we found successful, would be to pair the district curricular leadership with the 2 to 3 staff members and possibly the principal from each of those buildings. So have a cohesive, comprehensive group of elementary educators that we're working with through this visioning process. Rivercrest is on there on purpose. We know it's a great building, it's newish, there shouldn't be a whole lot of needs there. But we also don't think we can ignore the building. We need input from that staff. That staff has been working in your newest building. They're interacting with the types of teaching and learning spaces that we may want to use as a benchmark for what we apply to our other schools. So even though we're pretty sure there's not going to be much, if anything, needed at Rivercrest, we need their feedback, and we think they'd be critically important to making sure that we replicate what's working really well about Rivercrest, but maybe make a few tweaks to things that they would tweak now that we're almost 10 years from that building opening. We also want to make sure that every building has a voice in shaping the direction. If we're going to have equity across all of our school buildings at the K-5 level, we need to have voice and representation from all of them. This isn't a city-driven effort. This is going to have all of our schools involved. So we want to make sure that that team has a good cross-representation of educators on it. So it's a quick organization. Again, this is with no input from the district team, so there would be some work to do here. But that's one strategy we've used to make sure that we get a great engagement early in the process. Mike's going to talk about community engagement strategies and the success we found there.
Yeah, one of the next, after we've talked, creating a core planning team, we feel good internally, we want to start to look externally at how best to engage the broader community. And a process like this, especially if we're looking at hypothetical timelines around referendum schedules, we want to be thoughtful about how best to engage, what's the right strategy to do that, how to do that efficiently, right? Not move too quickly, but at the same time move through it in a manner that keeps us on track for a potential referendum, if that is in fact the path we go down. So what we've done for tonight is presented 2 different approaches to consider. And a lot of detail here, and we can spend more time in the Q&A going through these. The first option is a focus group or a community engagement session model. Okay, and the second option is going to be more of a committee-based approach. Okay, so in this first scenario, really what this is built around is a school board and admin-led process. Okay, and so what we're attempting to do is identify as a leadership group what are the things we want to learn from the community specifically, right? And go through a series of focus groups, specific events that allow us to ask those questions very specifically. Okay? And there's strategies and pros and cons to each these scenarios. In this scenario, as you see on the screen, this is in tab 1, just for your reference if you're looking in the book. If the pullout has this in a little larger size. You see in this diagram 2 focus group sessions laid out. We've done these where we've had 3 or 4 focus group sessions even, where we are looking to layer in very specific focuses to each of those conversations. Often first, it's really capacity building. So what we're trying to do is bring a group of individuals in the community up to speed on who we are as a district. What are our needs? Really, what are our enrollment projections? Who are we kind of as a baseline? Really trying to be sure we know our need before we start talking solutions. And then subsequently, the next focus groups, we can start to hone in that feedback from the community around potential solutions. One of the big benefits here is that we purposely would layer in a board work session, potentially in between each one of these dialogues. Okay, so what it allows us to do is summarize the feedback we get from the community, come back to the board, have an open dialogue about that, learn from the board what we want to learn in the next engagement, and then refine for our approach. And so in this scenario, obviously we want to be sure we're targeting to get attendance as much as possible at these. That has not been a challenge for Hudson historically. Right? We've gotten very good attendance at all of our community engagement sessions throughout any facility-related efforts so far. Here are just a couple of examples, whether it's via the district's listserv in district, postcards as direct mail, maybe even advertisement or social media push. A lot of different ways that we can try to get the word out and encourage folks to attend sessions. Really critical though is once you get to the session and you're in that event, one of the big benefits is that this really is not a sit and get session. We're not there really to just pump information into a group. It truly is built around getting their feedback. And so we would often structure the room in a way that gets us into small groups. So that works if we have 5 people show up or if we have 50 people show up. It works in that each table has a large printout potentially. This is just one example where we would present for 10-15 minutes, we'd pause, let them go into small group dialogue. The facilitation team would work the room, make sure that questions are being answered, that we're pulling out of those small groups good dialogue, and we'd report back. And truly by the end of that session, have a lot of good feedback and fostered a lot of dialogue. Really a key, if we think of this as community engagement, this is really the engagement side of that effort. Okay? So again, this works really well because it can be compounding, meaning if you have community members that plan to attend every meeting, that information is building on itself meeting after meeting. It also works if you have someone who's able to just plug in for one meeting. They get a voice at the table and they're able to lead with a good amount of information. So we found a lot of success with this as an approach. And then the second scenario that we're showing is a citizens committee-led effort. So this is an effort that truly takes the school board and the admin and steps back a level and functions more in a support capacity to a defined citizens committee. Okay? So again, there are going to be pros and cons to each of these scenarios. We've seen success in both of those. Here you'll see a support level at the top of the chart, financial advisor, architecture firm, potentially a surveying entity. From there then, the citizens committee would then be structured around a series of meetings. Okay? And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. Okay? And so key thing in this scenario is really how do you again get support and get attendance to build this committee. The reality is this group for a lot of our districts can function as a small body, maybe 8 to 10 people, or has functioned as a really large group, but obviously the more folks that you have a part of that, the more dynamics at play and potentially less efficient that process can go. Okay? In this scenario though, what we're trying to do is get as strong of a cross-section, especially at an elementary level, across the district. Because ideally we'd have voices that are representing the entire district if we're asking that group to really carry this effort from start to finish. Okay? So that may be a targeted set of invitations. It may go out more broadly within the community, but just a couple examples here where the team can support trying to garner development of that community. And then what we've done is not just started to strategize around what might the right approach be for community engagement, but just knowing schedule, that may impact potentially which option might be better. Okay? And so as you can imagine, the Citizens Committee is a more structured entity with a clear charge from start to finish. The focus groups, we have far more ability to be nimble in that process, meaning when we schedule those, the quantity of those that we schedule. Okay? So depending on the different time frames we're looking at, that may want to weigh into some of the discussions. So what we've done is put together purely hypothetical schedules in which to run potentially either of these options. And we did so towards a November 2020 path as well as an April 2021 path. And so if you were to flip to tab 2 in your book, you'll see these examples in your handout. And so in there you'll see what we attempted to do is kind of start to envision the potential phases that we would go through in this typical process, starting with the needs assessment that is going on in the educational visioning efforts, through option exploration, all the way down to the potential resolution for the board. And so what we're trying to do there is map out a bit of a visual of what the difference might be in a focus group model versus a citizens committee model, in a path to November versus a hypothetical path to April. And so again, a lot of detail there, and there's a lot of strategy woven into what we put into the book for tonight. And at the end of the session here in the Q&A, we'd be happy to dive a bit deeper into those as well. Okay. And then the last piece that we put together for the team's reference is, again, thinking about the citizens committee model and starting to strategize around how might that model function in a kind of a more micro level of detail, start to finish on a path to November versus, again, a path to April. And what we find is that that entity really, truly does need to be led. And so coming out of the gates, I think having critical knowing how to start a group like that and lead it all the way through with each of the steps woven in. You'll see in tab 3, my last tab for the evening, hang with us here, a detailed meeting by meeting outline of what that schedule could look like. And so what we've attempted to do here is really think about if a citizens committee is in place, that really becomes your kind of community experts of the district, right? And so what we've tried to do here is show a process to build that capacity up front. So we'll do a lot of information gathering with them and for them. We're trying to be sure they understand the district's financial state. So we'll see Finance 101 as part of this. We look at some prior studies to be sure they have a handle on the efforts that have been done to date. We also are recommending strongly that those entities get a chance to tour each of the facilities that they're being asked to weigh in on. And so what we've done is attempted to weave in how might we get them through all 5 or 6 of these facilities on a path to November or April. So again, a lot more detail here, and we can dive into this if we have some time at the end. But we thought important as you're weighing these scenarios to be able to start to see what that might look like.
We normally build these with clients. We just took a shot at this. Obviously, there's a lot of feedback here. We've done these in as little as 6 committee meetings and as many as 15 or more. So it depends on the complexity, the depth you want your committee to go, the formal charge the board gives them. And it's the longer the commitment, obviously the more difficult it is to keep that group intact as well. So finding the right balance of quantity of meetings. But we also want to be upfront with people that are going to volunteer to be on this committee that it is a commitment. And it can be as long as 10 plus meetings, and we need to make sure that they're committed to being there. So we want to make sure we have a vision for that, and that's just one example. We shared 2 examples we shared this evening as to how that might work. Needs assessment is a big piece. Of course, if we can't communicate our needs and articulate them clearly to the community, it's really difficult to talk to them about making an investment. And so you've done a lot of work with the Krause-Anderson report to date. This is our biggest, I'll say, kind of area we need a discussion at some point if we proceed as a partner. How deep do we want to go in terms of the building infrastructure review beyond what's already there? There's going to be things that come up that need to be done. We're assuming right now in our proposal that we'd be doing an extensive evaluation of each building. Not sure we need that. The Krause-Anderson report is a good baseline for where we need to go. We need to understand where we're at from a plumbing, HVAC, electrical perspective. A good deal of that is there. There will be some specifics as solutions start to roll out where the engineers are going to need to be engaged. But I don't know if they need or if you want to invest in them going back through each building and writing reports. Something I think we need to work through to make sure you're getting the scope that you would like. Roofs, Jim's got a good handle on them, and maybe as simple as creating a documented graphic depiction of roof condition that's just simply more consumable by the community. A lot of this effort is taking long, lengthy written reports and just simplifying them into graphics that community members are more likely to embrace and digest as they're evaluating needs. Exterior doors, again, very similar to roofs. You've got a good grasp. Do we need to document or not? We may not. ADA, always an issue, always a big piece, especially on a building with 11 floors. We're probably going to have some challenges, ramps, elevators, lifts, things. At a minimum, we need to make sure that we know where those are, how we can remedy them, so documenting those as well. Site analysis and traffic flow. Some sites it's easy because all parking's on the street and buses drop off on one side and cars on the other. Others it's more complicated. Make sure we understand traffic movements. Any solution that's proposed hopefully is going to, master plan will be addressing separation of buses and parents, safe access for students to playgrounds, all the challenges that come with elementary and middle schools. Safety and security, no need to talk through it again, but we have to make sure it's there. At a minimum, we have to document that we're good, we have everything handled. If there are another layer of safety and security improvements that are desired, that we just haven't been able to fund yet through grants or district operating budget, we need to make sure we understand those and get them documented so we can communicate that we have it taken care of. Ask Steve to run through educational vision.
Thanks. It's great to be here again, by the way. And we went by the high school earlier, and it was really neat to see it all lit up and activated. There, just the parking lot was full. Really cool. Hey, We went through a similar process there in terms of visioning, and obviously this is going to be critical at the elementary level, where you've got buildings that are old, and we're teaching new methods now. In the last 20 years, we all know that education has changed a lot. As you're well aware, because we did that at the high school, we brought it into the 21st century. Now it's time to look at the elementaries in the same way. First thing we do is we're going to send out a faculty and a staff survey where we can kind of get the nuts and bolts out of the way. The room's too hot, the room's too cold, there's not enough storage, all those kinds of things. But really what we want to find out is your educational vision, and how are kids being taught today, how are kids learning today within the Hudson district. And so we go through, we collect this data, but then we go into a process whereby we will sit down with our visioning committee, our groups of people, and we found a really good method to do this is to break the groups into smaller groups. And we will create these large, you can see it in the example on this table here. That's just a document that sort of breaks the building into components, and then we can talk about each one of those components within each table, and we will walk around the room and kind of facilitate that. But what that does is gives everyone an idea, kind of an open mind, and just sort of talking about the space, the individual space, but we're also looking at kind of philosophies and that sort of. And what happens is we collect all these notes, and we might have 20 or 30 of these sheets that have all kinds of different notes on them. And by the way, in this one, it's academic organization, classroom pedagogy. Those things will change as we go through the process. But again, we're looking for ideas here and vision at this point. And then we'll put it into a more formal document that eventually ends up it gives us sort of a guideline, some design guidelines that we can use that will address not only the nuts and bolts, but the culture, the program, the environment of the school. And we've got a number of different games that we can play that will get people involved and kind of get them to open up. And it's just a matter of, these are just things where we're looking for just ideas from them that we'll put on a wall and transfer that into some data that we can use. But again, it's all about getting that vision that is unique to Hudson, as we did at the high school. What we have found, which we didn't do at the high school, we found in the last few years, what we've been doing is going into classrooms and going to school, sitting in a classroom with the kids, whether it's in elementary or middle school, and just learning how those teachers and how the staff and the students work in the day, what happens during the day. That way we can sort of get first-hand knowledge as to what's happening. And of course, it's really important to get the kids involved. We know that's going to be, we get really cool ideas from the kids. This is just an example of a middle school where the kids brought us in, and they were doing a science class, a unit on hygiene. And they said, there's nowhere to wash your hands before we go into the cafeteria. We hadn't thought about that, even though we've been designing these things for 20 years. Thought it was a great idea. We incorporated that, and it's working. And it was completely the kids' idea.
So after all that engaging, none of that's architecture, right? It's listening to staff, it's engaging, it's learning, it's understanding how you want to deliver a K-8 curriculum in Hudson for your students today and into the future. We need to focus on creating equitable space and equitable opportunities across all of our elementary buildings specifically. Middle school a little easier given its current configuration, so elementary schools. This is in tab 4 of your book. This is our quick first shot at all the different spaces we may be talking about needing or already having in each of your schools. And this is really just a checklist across all your buildings. So Rivercrest is the first column. That's really our benchmark. Where are we at in our newest building and how is it serving us well? Likely that is going to say yes to almost everything. All of our key features that we develop through engagement with you as a board, with our visioning teams, all the different aspects and spaces that they want to support teaching and learning moving forward are going to end up getting documented here. Again, Rivercrest is highly likely we're going to have a lot of yeses there. We're there, it addresses those needs, it's doing it well. A lot of the other schools may not. And what we want to do is clearly identify where our needs are. So everything that's doing well, great. We're going to get that summarized, we're going to document it. Here, areas that may need an investment will also be identified. And this becomes the guidepost for all the solutions that are going to be explored moving forward. Because it clearly identifies where our needs are, Our needs are going to be different building to building. Some may be great on classroom space, others may be great on special ed space, and that need could be flipped across our building. So we have to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what our goals are at every building, because they won't be the same, but we know we want to create that equitable master plan across all of our elementary buildings. That eventually translates into space. Sometimes we have to build additions, sometimes we start over. A lot of times it's renovation, and it's tweaking existing space more than anything else. And so, again, across all buildings, clearly understanding space needs, so solutions, which we're finally getting to pictures and architecture in a second here, are rooted in solving the needs that are identified through this visioning process. Finally, ending this phase with capacity. We have a sense of capacity, we've gone through the efforts, but as we explore solutions, we may be impacting capacity. We may be increasing, we may be decreasing it if we're remodeling existing space. So we want to make sure we always come back and revisit capacity so that you know moving forward what the educational capacity of your schools are. Options and solutions.
Yeah, so obviously, a problem well stated is half solved, right? So all this effort up front is critical, right? If we don't know where we're heading, we don't know what we're solving for. So really making sure we go through each one of these early steps before we land on viable solutions. And so once we felt that we've done that, this should look familiar. I think this was page 1 of 3 or 4 from the prior effort of really just mind dumping all the viable solutions that might be beneficial. And this process, how you go about building this, how deep this is, how iterative it gets, will a bit depend on the approach we take, as we had noted earlier. Right? So if that's a citizens-led committee, we often see this get much deeper before it gets smaller. If it's a more refined effort around focus groups, the board may go through an exercise with admin to start with a list and then hone it in on which specific pieces they want feedback from. Right? So just depending on the path we go, we think objectively starting with everything on the table is the best path. And then from there it starts to look like architecture. So Steve's going to hit on that.
Yeah, then we want to kind of test fit the options and make them somewhat real. And so we'll start to look at where there might be opportunity for additions, where there might be renovations. We want to look at the site plan. This is a plan of a similar district where they asked us to look at equity among the elementary schools. Their guidelines were safety and security, 21st century learning, equitable PE spaces, and equitable special ed areas. And so we went through every one of their campuses and looked at how we might bring each campus into an equitable situation. We looked at both from a K-4 situation and then a K-5 situation. So we went through literally dozens and dozens of iterations until we arrived at something that everyone was comfortable with, and then we could put costs against it.
I think the key is every iteration was based on that equitable needs assessment where we knew exactly what the needs were across all schools. Didn't matter if it was a K-4, K-5 configuration. They had options where we were going from 9 elementaries to 7 elementaries with closures. All those different scenarios were flushed out with additions and renovations. So community could see, neighbors could understand how it would impact them from the site perspective. As we said before, it's not always additions. Sometimes it's just simple renovations. Taking a very traditional middle school in this case, opening space up in the core of the building that didn't have natural light, and creating collaboration spaces and houses for those students. And then on occasion we get the chance to do new buildings. So if there's new sites to be evaluated, we're going to do test fits. Make sure the playgrounds fit, site circulation works, queuing for parents' buses, everything are effective. Finally, preliminary budgeting, critically important piece of every project. It's not so much about exactly what's happening, we need to know what it's going to cost. This drives all the way down to building infrastructure, capital maintenance, improvements for educational needs. Sometimes there's additions, sometimes there's not. This again is representative, should look familiar. This was the, I think, 7, 8, 9 page high school budget for question 1. And all the detail, hopefully you remember down to every room and the depth of investment that was going to be made. Community survey. Great experience in Hudson, obviously got us from 3 pathways to 1 that the community eventually supported. We think it's critically important that the architectural direction cannot determine the survey strategy. We can't come in as a group and say, we have a great solution, everybody's really excited about it, and that's the only way that we're going to engage the community via survey. We need to let the survey firm working with the district and our team work through a process to make sure we're getting you data. Just serving a great idea and getting a no, we don't support it, doesn't really help. We need to make sure that the survey firm can really dig deep and give you what you need. So 16 pages, wasn't it, Nick? Isn't that where we landed on this one? Still the longest, by the way, but it was very effective and obviously got us where we needed to be.
We hope to stay there.
No, we don't need 16 pages for this, I hope. Hopefully the solutions are a little cleaner this time. Finally, next phase is refining. So we get data back from the community via survey and we have to refine the solutions. Maybe we're right on, maybe it's good, community says we agree, thumbs up. Maybe they say we like the direction but it's a little too expensive, we have to make some refinements. So this step's pretty straightforward, really reacting, using data to refine the direction. And then finally documenting. So having a final report master plan for you. We're going to move through this quickly, Jamie, to get you guys on track. Finally, if a phase 2 is we don't assume this, our process really is focused on getting to survey, it's not getting to referendum. The survey is going to be the driver that's going to dictate and help you decide whether the community is ready or wants you to consider a referendum or not. If you do, we're very fortunate, and that's one of our successful projects, obviously, an 82% success rate in the last 5 years. That's something we're very proud of. A lot of those that are not in the successful category have a story to tell. Didn't listen to the survey data, wanted a swimming pool, and the community said, no, we don't want a swimming pool. A lot of different components that went into them. Doesn't change our level of commitment, though. Those 18%, we were still with them the whole way. We helped them with every aspect of that process and project. We don't walk away from the client. Got a great team that does this. I still remain involved in leading the messaging strategy, community engagement side for clients. Allie, who worked with the district last time on leading the communications efforts. And then she's got a team of graphic designers. This is a group that's grown to 5 or 6 people now and really have the depth to support every client, not only during the planning phase, but if we go to referendum, really have the ability to lead that in partnership with you. Finally, scheduling, graphics. I think we're pretty familiar with that process. But again, proven process, depth of team. We're not just architects, we're going to be part of your strategy, part of your referendum support. We don't hand it off to other team members. Final piece, fee proposal. So phase 1, the facility committee facilitation, fixed fee of $107,000. It's in the proposal document we shared with you tonight. This is inclusive, so hopefully the 3 notes make sense. We've included a full exhaustive engineering study of buildings. Not sure we need that. We have to, I think, get together and decide what's the right scope, the right level of intensity, the right look that builds upon what you've done. We see there's a potential savings of as much as $20,000 coming out of that if we go to a slightly revised scope. We have $5,000 as a placeholder for structural analysis. If we get through the buildings and find that there aren't any major observable structural challenges, that's not a fee we charge. That would get credited and come off the top of that fee. We didn't include new site analysis right now. We don't know if there's a need for new sites to be analyzed or not. We know you have the property on UU, very familiar with it, have studied it before. But if there are new sites that would come up, that might be that would be the fee of $1,500 to study those. Again, if a phase 2 is explored or a referendum, a project, or a fixed fee would be $7,500 for those services. So thank you. Great to be back.
Open up to questions then from board, or want to include people from the administration too. Obviously, we don't have our full complement of administrators, the administrative team that normally sits on the school board meeting, but Tim, Tracy, and Jim are, would be involved in this process quite a bit. So.
Mr. President?
Yes, Rob.
So you talked about the Citizens Committee. 75% of any voting public, generally speaking, on average, is non-parent, non-staff. How do you get those folks engaged and to participate in these committees?
It's actually one of the reasons so the last two years roughly, basically our projects have been 50-50 in terms of focus groups or citizens committees. We've had the same level of success. We haven't found that one is a better predictive of a successful referendum or not. Each one is right for different communities, for different districts. So we don't have a bias towards one. We want to work with you to pick the right one. We have found that it's really difficult to get non-parents, non-staff to commit for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months across 10 to 15 meetings for 2 to 3 hours in an evening. So that is a big challenge with that approach. There isn't a great way to do it. We have never had one where 70% of the room are non-parents, non-staff. It's easy to get sports boosters, it's easy to get the PTO families engaged, it's easy to get the drama clubs, they're easy. It is, Rob, as you described, that non-parent, non-staff group that's very difficult to get engaged. We have had more success getting them to attend focus groups or community engagement sessions because it's less of a commitment. It's 2 hours, 3 times, and they're engaged. We still, in either scenario, don't get a statistically valid sampling of that group to the point where we would say, don't bother with the survey, we've got good data. The survey, in the end, is the driver. It gives you the data. It's the predictable component. That's going to push you across the finish line and making a decision.
Mr. President?
Yes. Yes.
So, having gone through the high school effort, including the middle school, and then looking at this effort, what would be the main difference in terms of how we need to engage the community in this effort versus the previous engagement?
I think the biggest difference is going to be eventually, if a solution comes forward where not every school is affected, we will have a challenge potentially in terms of why we made investments in school A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F. Oftentimes, there's a very intentional decision by the board that we're going to invest and we're going to touch all of our facilities at the elementary level to make sure that every family is positively affected by that. Process-wise, the positive is there will be less, I'll say, of our outside groups, the athletic boosters, the drama clubs. There's going to be less pressure from those groups in an elementary solution. So in a way it's easier because we don't have those other peripheral, still critically important projects, but the peripheral pieces that many community members see as wants, not needs. I don't know that there's a real difference in terms of Citizens Committee versus focus groups. They both work extremely well. Both have great referendum success rates associated with them. Just depends on what's right for you. I think you've got the trust of your community. They've proven it. You've delivered the projects on time, on budget. Hopefully they're happy with the end product. I think that's critical. You've laid the groundwork to have this conversation. If this was like last time, where we're coming off an unsuccessful attempt at a high school, I think that the Citizens Committee made a ton of sense. It was the right way to go. You're coming off of the community saying no to something. In this case, there should be some positive momentum here, which I think does give you the ability, if you want, to use focus groups or engagement sessions instead.
Mr. President? Yes. So who does your project budgeting, and how is your project budgeting done, and how is it different, if it is different than last time?
So project budgeting is done by our architectural team. So the 3 of us would be, since we're the ones in the room, engaged with you as a client, understanding your expectations, in the room with the educators, understanding their vision. All of the things that don't get transferred to paper until much deeper into a design process can be integrated and implemented into the budgeting process. We probably have 15 projects that have bid in the K-12 world within the last 2-3 months alone. We have all that real-time data. We've got 5 more that are going out of the office within the next couple months that we'll be bidding as we're developing these budgets. So we've got a great deal of real-time data for building-specific projects, additions, renovations, K-12 environment, every type of operability, for transparency, for finishes. We've got a great database of not only past, but current bid environment. So our team leads that, great deal of database and experience doing it.
My question is, your 2 approaches, focus group and committee. Have you had instances where you started with one and then switched?
I would say we've had instances where we started with focus groups and then went to Citizens Committee. We haven't had one that goes the other way, because once we head down the path of empowering a group of community members to lead this process and be our eyes and ears and bring back a recommendation to the board, it's really hard midway through to say, it's not kind of going how we wanted it to, so we're going to switch to a different strategy. So simple answer, yes, but we've never had one go Citizens Committee that didn't see itself all the way through.
Would your fee change if we started with a focus group and went to Citizens Committee?
Focus groups are definitely more efficient, and it would have a positive impact on our fee, meaning it would go down potentially. We're assuming at least a dozen Citizens Committee meetings at this point as part of the process if we go that route. So that, I'm not advocating one over the other, there just is a level of efficiency that comes with those focus groups, because we're doing a lot more work in a controlled setting, smaller group, educators during the day, board in the evening, and we can implement. Maybe there's 3 or 4 touches throughout the process through engagement sessions and focus groups versus that 10+ meetings with a citizens committee.
Similarly, I think keep in mind if we're still on the fence or still working through which potential referendum path is right, November versus April. With the clients we're working with now, we say that we should fix to the more stringent timeline, right, to keep us on track. Yet we know there are going to be key thresholds as we go forward where we can pull the reins back, right? And so the reality is we get down the path and just start to recognize that we're moving too quickly. The information we're gathering, we need more time to study that. We may recognize that in those thresholds, November's not right. April might be the right time for the district to consider something. The reality is it's more difficult to pull the reins back when you have a citizens committee in place, right, than you do having the more nimble approach with the focus groups. Okay? And so again, not to suggest one is right over the other, but those are the types of factors as you start to weigh out, how do we go about making that decision that may want to weigh into that decision.
Mr. President?
Yes, good.
The elementary school space equity summary draft that you included gets at the dedicated space and enough space, like square footage space. How in the process do you get at the nice space? I mean, the piece around like it matters, the aesthetics of the environment that kids are learning in and teachers are working in. How does that play into your process? Because I think there's some tendency to push back and say they've got the rooms, and yet their lockers are beat up and there's no natural light. How do you get at, where in the process does that come into play?
And I think that's part of the visioning process where we're talking about the school culture. And part of that culture might be high ceilings or natural light coming into the space or different types of spaces that are furnished differently. So that all occurs during that visioning process where we're identifying those design parameters that we want to carry through all of the schools. And so we're going to get lots of that information. And we have a lot of historical or recent pictures that we can show to the groups. And as we did in the high school, we may even want to take tours where we can get a kind of a concrete idea of what those spaces look like. And all of that is part of creating that vision and that guideline as we go through the process.
That spreadsheet is a very rudimentary document as a way to quickly define and make sure that every solution explorer checks the boxes. It doesn't get into the specific needs at every building. Some may have great terrazzo floors, some may have vinyl, asbestos vinyl tile. And we have a goal that we're going to get rid of asbestos and we're going to have connectivity between classrooms. We need to get into that and truly understand the curricular delivery goals in order to evaluate the softer side of the buildings at every level.
We've done those as kind of the stoplight model. What we showed here was yes or no, right? Black or white, does it have it or doesn't it? We've also done it with kind of the red, yellow, green mentality of, are we right on track or do we need to start to plan for something or is it too behind? So there are some ways as you get into the subjective categories that we can build a tool to support that as well.
Mr. President.
Yes.
To continue on with what Heather was mentioning about equity with the buildings, I think one of our challenges, I'd like to know how you possibly could work with this, is that our buildings that are needing more of the work that we already know are more sparsely populated or the higher, more expensive homes are those kids are going to the schools that are already pretty good, Rivercrest and Prairie. I mean, how do you respond to that? I mean, if we're talking a November referendum possibly, it's presidential, it's very political, it's, I guess, coming off the high school referendum, you talk about momentum. I'm worried we're losing momentum because the tax burden of the high school project is now hitting, plus reassessments are going through. All of these things where people are seeing it on their tax bill for the first time again in a little bit. So I mean, I know I just dumped a lot on you.
There's no doubt that is a risk. Some communities seeing the investment and having a physical manifestation that they can see, touch, feel associated with a tax impact is enough. They think it was worth it, they see that it matters, they see that it's helpful to students, they see that as a positive impact on community. If that's their connection to that last investment, they're probably ready for the next one. Those that were opposed to that one, through the pure lens of the fiscal component of it, I don't know that we're going to get them on board with this next phase anyway. We're going to try, we're going to engage with them, we're going to have conversations about need, we're going to make sure that they're in attendance, but I don't know that we get them there. Where the investments are made is, it really should be need-based, it shouldn't be biased based on more affordable homes here, more expensive homes here. If we set up the standards, and these are, as a district and as a board, what we feel that art should always be delivered in a classroom, not on a cardboard. We believe that special ed services are going to be offered in classrooms or in dedicated spaces designed for special ed delivery of instruction versus in corridors. If those are things we believe in and set as standards, it shouldn't matter a ton where the school is located. The size of the school may matter. A 200 student school versus a 588 student school probably won't have 5 of everything, but they'll have 1 of everything, or 2 of everything. So we right size it to the building, but if it's truly a goal to deliver instruction in a certain way, it doesn't matter where the school is located, what students attend there, we're going to make sure that the master plan sets up to accomplish that.
Mr. President?
Yes.
And so engineers work at the direction of the architect. Existing facilities, like when we interviewed the first time, are different than greenfield projects. You know, we had 1,400 change orders, should have been about 600 this last time. How is this time different? And I apologize for asking the question, but how is this time different?
This is a study, not a project, so there won't be change orders during the master planning and referendum effort. How would this be different? Unless we're looking at a multi-phase, 30-month complicated delivery, which I don't envision any of the elementary schools having a solution as complicated as the high school solution was. Could we have done better? Absolutely. We'll that all the time. I think Nick will tell you we have not walked away. We're still here. We're still responsive. We're still engaged on any challenge that arises. How will it be different? I think we're going to assign a different team. We're going to be more diligent, and we're going to do our best to deliver projects with as few change orders as possible. The number can be debated. There's many of those that were desirable change orders. They were enhancements to the program that the district wanted to accomplish. They weren't all simply pointing a finger at Joe did something wrong or Jane didn't do this right. So, fair point, but it's unfair to group them all in as a architect or engineer directed challenge.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes. Bruce?
Can you talk a little bit about 21st century learning at the elementary level versus the high school level? I think we got into a lot of discussion at the high school level, but maybe not as much at the elementary level. I would assume natural lighting, collaborative workspaces, etc. But at some level, high schools probably get more from certain aspects of 21st century learning versus elementary. So what are some of those activities you get at the elementary level for 21st century learning?
Well, I think the classroom is the kind of the home of an elementary student. They're there pretty much all day. So it's the environment within the classroom itself. And what we found in 21st century learning, that kids they need spaces outside of that classroom too. So how do you do that and still maintain that supervision? Well, as we did at the high school, that with some transparency there, you can create space outside the classroom, so that kids can do some of their own or some programs at their own speed. And we also see many more small group instruction areas. Natural light is a big one in an elementary because those kids are in pretty much that classroom all day that we want to get natural light in those spaces. So it really is similar in a way to the high school in terms of the extensions of the classroom and that sort of thing. And I think It's just more maybe concentrated into this classroom space.
And I think what we find is that it's going to differ if you're kindergarten to fifth grade. We see a lot of educational curriculum delivery change just in those 5 or 6 years. We see a lot more engagement, a lot of the resource spaces get used more at the 4th and 5th grade level than they do prior to that. So investing in generating that type of space may be less valuable. The transparency and the flexibility is still key. Furniture has become an anchor, right? If that classroom is the home base, it's really how quickly can we adapt that room on the fly as a teacher, right? And so that really comes down to our educational surfaces around the room, and then obviously the furniture that supports that. As we get outside of that, we talk a lot about STEM integration at the elementary level. That's maybe less a tech ed or a science classroom or destination, and more how are we pushing that into the classrooms, right? We still create some maybe project lead the way lab or like a maker space environment that's emerging out of our libraries in a lot of cases. But really, how do you define a library now at an elementary level? That's really shifting. And so a very good question, and I think really it kind of depends on the goals of the district from a curriculum delivery standpoint, integration of technology. Clearly that's been a goal of the district, right? We did a lot of dialogue around that. And so where does that land in your youngest learners as well?
Elementary kids are really active learners too. They probably learn better when they're moving than when they're sitting, so making sure we're providing teachers access to spaces where that can happen. When they're differentiating their classroom, whether they're collaborating with a neighbor, a peer teacher teaching a similar grade or a grade above or below them, making sure that they have the ability to have active learning environments for students to access all throughout the day. Pretty important piece of elementary life these days.
Question. Can you guys talk a little bit about your site analysis work or previous experience, particularly in sites that are limited?
Yeah, so I mean, the basic analysis would be identifying needs, conditions of asphalts, concretes, place braces. That's pretty much documenting challenges more than anything else. The exhibit we shared there was an example of 2 elementary schools that shared a site that had no defined drop-off pickup. They had parents cutting through areas. They couldn't come up with a solution that the fire department would support because it blocked access for emergency vehicles. And so after years of iterations, we finally came up with a solution to build an outdoor classroom. We had to do some pretty major revisions to get fire department access where they needed, but it was a physical break to prevent parents and buses from blending together. Most sites, quite frankly, are very similar to Willow Glen. I told you I was going to say Willow River, sorry. Willow Glen's another project we have going right now. So Willow River, we've actually done and are doing more synthetic turf at the elementary school level, believe it or not. So Sheboygan, in the process of retrofitting synthetic turf, small pieces of turf, so that the neighborhood can use it so they can plow it in the winter, so that it's a durable, usable surface year-round, and kids aren't isolated to just asphalt or just playground equipment. Cross is a great example. Sheboygan, we're doing that in. So a lot of ways, every site's different, but a lot of experience doing small sites as well.
My next question, back to process again. You mentioned about switching, maybe starting with focus groups and going to committee. Have you ever had a hybrid where you have a committee that is overseeing the process, getting information and so forth, and trying to get it out to the community, but then still holding some focus group where you invite other members of the community to come in, give ideas?
Yeah, Mike led a process like that in Greendale for us, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and so there, instead of giving the committee a broad charge to oversee the entire effort, it was really honed in on just a specific component of that. So it was a committee that, in their case, was just focused on equity between their 3 elementary schools, right? So they were just focused on how are we, in their case, they had some geography boundaries, some pretty big deltas between the economic status of different parts of their community. So they were really focused on how do we, from the community standpoint, lead an effort to be sure that we can look across the table when we're done with this process and say that we've thought of as much as possible we got ahead of this. So for them, it actually emerged out of very specific feedback from their first couple focus groups. In their case, some survey data. They did kind of a pre-survey that said that was really important. So they said, let's heighten that as a standalone element. Didn't give them a charge outside of those boundaries, right? They didn't say, give us feedback on anything relative to site dynamics or other things. It was just very specific to educational delivery and creating equity. So I think when it comes down to that, it's really about the board charge and then how that fits into the broader process.
And it looks like your fee at 102,000 for that first part.
107.
What's that?
107.
Where's the? Oh, 107, thank you. 107, I was already starting to give ourselves credits for some of those things that you were
Fair.
talking about. But if we were to, have you had instances where you've gone to the survey and it turns out we were way off and we gotta now have another 5 or 6 committee meetings before we even make a recommendation? Does that change the fee?
It does not, that's our risk. We've assumed 12 at this point committee meetings as a baseline for something to assume, but we know it's our risk. You can't tell us the number of meetings it's gonna take. We can't tell you the number of meetings it's gonna take. We know there's risk there. We're assuming it likely will be more than 12, but we've assumed something in the middle, and that's our risk. And we absorb that if it goes beyond.
And I kind of agree with the idea of assume a shorter period of time. But the one thing we can't do, because we've been telling the community, we're not assuming that there's going to be a referendum at all. And so I think you can set your timeline for what your mission is, but then if bumps are along the way, then that extra 5 months may be necessary in order to get this to pass. I'd rather do that than hurry one that's not ready to be passed by the community, because then it sets us.
Complete agreement. And as I said, we really want to set a path towards survey, not towards referendum. Survey is really the benchmark. That's where we get, and that really is, for you as a board, that the driver gives you the data to say the community is supportive or is not supportive, or they're on the fence. And until we get to that, it's really hard to say whether November or April, or not even at all in 2021, is the path we should be taking.
All right. Any other questions then? All right. Looks like we have none, so thank you again for your
Well, thanks again.
presentation.
Really appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to continuing the partnership.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do a 5-minute recess and start at 7:02.